If you think the economy is more important than the environment, try holding your breath while counting your money. Good evening and welcome. This is Face the Nation. Today is International World Water Day. World Water Day falls on the 22nd of March. We are meeting you at the outset of where we stand as far as conserving the environment. Today we are talking about how important it is to conserve the environment in the country. To discuss all this and more, we've invited 4 guests to our studios this evening as well. Joining us this evening on Face the Nation is Attorney at Law Jagat Gunawardena, environmental lawyer. Also joining us tonight on the show is Dr. Sevwandi Jayakodi, Director, Environmental Foundation Limited, Dr. Ajanta Pereira, environmental scientist, as well as Attorney at Law Ravindranath Dabare, Chairman of the Centre for Environmental Justice. Let's move our attention to Dr. Sevwandi Jayakodi, Director, Environmental Foundation Limited. Dr. Jayakodi, interestingly today, a government minister announced that 2 reservoirs are going to be built in the Sinharaja Forest Reserve. As an environmental scientist as well as an environmental advocate, how do you view this decision by the government?
Well, water is a very important need. There is no doubt water is required for daily consumption, and also we being a nation that heavily depends on agriculture, water is certainly a need. What really matters here with this statement is how do we extract water. I do understand that at the moment all around the country there is a dire need for potable water, water for agriculture. For years our practice had been, because we are blessed with 103 rivers in this country, which is remarkable compared to many other countries, we have been having this practice that rivers are at our hand to play. That's where the problem is, basically because it's so easy to direct water from one catchment to the other, extract water from one sub-basin to another sub-basin. And when we do these things, the usual practice had been to look at the spot of development and accordingly to think about the type of development. But the question we have today is to decide whether we can do it anymore like that. Basically because rivers, in my opinion, are very dynamic systems. It's a continuum. What happens in the upper catchment really affects the lower catchment. So you really need to think, when you make changes to one segment of a river, how the entire continuum is going to be affected. So I think we have to look at the problem in that point of view and then discuss this further.
Dr. Jayakodi, interestingly, the Sinharaja forest is a national heritage in the country. When you build 2 reservoirs for the objective of the reservoirs is to provide drinking water to those in the Hambantota district. The objective is very clear, is a good objective as well, because at the end of the day the people in the Hambantota district, wherever they are living, have to get water. There is no question about that. But Sinharaja Forest Reserve, being a national heritage site, would this be affected in any way?
Not just for Sinharaja, I would say. I would talk about that entire catchment, the basin. Because when you look at a situation like this, yes, we have Sinharaja, which is protected, which is so important to maintain as it is, because it's a national heritage, not just for us, but also for the entire world. But I would go beyond that and I would talk about how it can affect the river basin itself, because that's the kind of thinking that we need to bring in. Because for a long time we've been talking about certain spots and becoming nostalgic. But my question is, when you try to build a reservoir anywhere in this country, not just Sinharaja, what really happens to the lower part of it once you sort of like ensure that through a weir or dam that you store water, and then what happens to the environmental flow that is very much required, what really happens to the moisture that is required for the rest of the soil, and what really happens mainly to the fauna that are showing lateral movement. When I say lateral movement, they don't have any other way of moving back and forth.
So let's get into business. In the event the two reservoirs are built in Sinharaja, does that mean that deforestation will take place in the forest reserve?
Definitely there will be deforestation. That's basically because anyone who has visited Sinharaja area knows the extent of the forest in that area. So you have to sacrifice something in order to gain something. In this case we are talking about a very important but also a vulnerable location. So what is required at this moment, I think, is to discuss, is that the correct selection, is that the correct location, and if you really want to go forward with it, in which way are you going to mitigate it? But I think even before we start talking about mitigation, what really requires is that the only option to supply water? Are there other options we've ignored? Is there any way that this catchment can retain water, bring water without that kind of development to the lower course of the river? We've not talked about these things. I think that it's the time that we think about that kind of development. Is constructing reservoirs, is temporarily holding water the solution for agriculture and potable water in this country? What if we think about reforesting along the river basin, especially in the riverine area?
Very quickly, Dr. Jayakodi, before moving on to Attorney at Law Jagat Gunawardena, Sinharaja is also among one of the World Heritage Sites named by UNESCO. Building two reservoirs in the forest, will we lose being a World Heritage Site?
I think Mr. Gunawardena would be the best person to answer that question, but I can tell you one thing, that when we get into, when we commit for a World Heritage Site, we also commit to wise use of it and wise management of it. Right. So when you talk about wise management, it talks about how do you protect the biodiversity, how do you protect the abiotic environment, but also it talks about how do you ensure that the services and the benefits are shared.
Right.
In here, I think what we really need to look at is, I'm very sure unless we do it properly, unless we take a decision whether to do it or not, that itself is a decision that got to be made in order to decide whether we need to move forward.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sevanthi Jayakodi, Director, Environmental Foundation Limited. Attorney at Law Jagat Gunawardena, environmental lawyer. Mr. Gunawardena, let's get the ball rolling with you. The question is, UNESCO World Heritage Site, building two reservoirs in the Sinharaja Forest Reserve, would we lose that honor of having one of the World Heritage Sites in Sri Lanka? Your time starts now.
We have to look at the criteria that had been made use of to make Sinharaja as a World Heritage Site. One criteria is the biological diversity. The other criteria is the amount of endemic species that are found in the system or the Sinharaja forest. And the third criteria, as Professor Jayakodi said, is the environmental services provided by the system to the wider country, or the benefits to the surrounding areas. So coming to these three criteria, we will see that all these three criteria would be adversely affected by any destruction of forest for whatever the purpose is. So when the road project was also mooted, we had our own reservations that the World Heritage status would be in jeopardy, and if there is going to be a reservoir construction, the area of forest that has to be sacrificed would be much more than what the road had sacrificed. So we are in a risky position, I should say. It's up to the UNESCO to make the decision, but we are in a risky position of losing the World Heritage status of this forest, because it will adversely affect all these three. It will adversely affect the biological diversity, it will adversely affect the endemics, and no one knows whether there will be any point endemics in this area which will go extinct from the whole world. There would be point endemic species of animals, point endemic species of plants. Still there is no environmental evaluation or environmental assessment of this area to decide whether there will be such a loss. And the third, the ecosystem services that are provided to the surrounding areas would also be adversely affected. So in all these three aspects, we are having a situation where the future of the World Heritage status would be in jeopardy, I should say.
Mr. Gunawardena, in the government's defense, the government may say, is likely to say, this is a noble cause. We are just not building two reservoirs for the fun of it. We are going to provide water, drinking water, to those people who do not have access to clean drinking water in the country. Can that argument be bought?
That argument can be brought, but again, it's up to the authorities, the government, to decide on the best possible alternative for a problem. So have they looked at all the possible alternatives that would be made use of to bring potable water and for agricultural purposes to this area before they decide on building reservoirs inside Sinharaja? Or if they want to build a reservoir in the southern province to divert water, is this the only location or is this the best location? So all these are what we call primary and secondary alternatives that have to be evaluated and considered before they make a decision. Now what we have seen instead is announcement had been made, but we are not aware whether deep analysis of primary and secondary alternatives had been evaluated by the authorities before coming to this kind of a decision, or it is an ad hoc statement made by a minister of the government. So we are still in a position to ascertain the basis on which this statement had been based.
Mr. Gunawardena, let's talk about the rule of law in the country. The government is saying that they have been able to uphold the rule of law in the country. However, many quarters in society are saying that the rule of law has deteriorated to a great extent since this government came into power. How is this affecting the justice system to mete out laws against perpetrators who destroy the environment?
The overall law and order situation of the country affects all the environmental actions which need the intervention of the law. So that is very clear, and if the law and order situation deteriorates, as it has happened in the recent past in so many different aspects, it will invariably adversely affect the law and order situation regards the environmental laws. So in order to bring the situation back, we had to take legal action against perpetrators regardless of their status in the society or their affiliations. So as long as we uphold the law, the overall legal situation improves, the enforcement of environmental laws will also be affected in a positive manner. But if the overall legal situation deteriorates by some people taking the law into their own hands and working in impunity against the legal system, then the overall situation deteriorates and it will adversely affect everything that we are going to protect.
Thank you very much, Attorney at Law Jagat Gunawardena, environmental lawyer. We now move our attention to Attorney at Law Ravindranath Dabare, Chairman of the Center for Environmental Justice. Mr. Dabare, the discussion is about the economy right now, economic development, infrastructure development, and the government is hell-bent to say that economic development as well as environmental development is very supreme to them at the moment. Do you think that this has to come at the cost of environmental destruction? Your time starts now.
Not at all, because if we look at the statistics in exactly before 100 years, that is in 1920, we had the forest cover amounting to 49%, and the population of the country was close to 5.2 million. You can imagine the era when 5.2 million human beings utilizing the other area other than the forest cover. That means the 5.2 million population used 51% of the area of the country. Now after 100 years, what is the scenario? Now we have only 20% of the forest cover, and 20% of this forest cover is expecting the environmental services, the whole population amounting to 21 million is expecting the environmental services from this 20% of the forest cover. These services, the environmental services expected by the environment as well as the human beings, cannot be provided by this 20% alone, and according to the statistics and according to the expert, at least there should be 30% or 35% of the forest cover in order to sustain. Now we have passed the break-even point. Therefore, touching the forest cover or the forest area or the ecosystem anymore cannot be bear or cannot be borne. Therefore, any developmental activity has to be taken place in the area where the human settlements are already set up. That means the 80% of the total area of the country can be utilized, so have to be utilized, has to be utilized. Otherwise, if anybody touches the forest cover, then the health of the environment will be deteriorated.
Mr. Abare, do you think environmentalists in Sri Lanka have a say in how things are being done in the country?
Nowadays, so even because we have been acting as environmental activities, so we are in the field of environmental protection for more than 2 decades or nearly 3 decades. We had to fight with each and every government and a lot of administrative officers to protect environment.
But if I may recollect right, a few years ago, your organization went to court against the building of the Port City project as well. However, now the port city is being very well built, and environmental activists, as you say, are silent about what has happened. So do you think the environmental activists in Sri Lanka really have a concrete say in what has to happen in the country and how the country should be directed in the future?
Now the pathetic situation is most of the policymakers, they do not listen to the environmentalists, and they do not take environmental concerns into consideration. Because environmental health is not any other thing, but it is the health of the human beings. Because when the environmental health is deteriorated, human health cannot be maintained. That link, that interconnection has to be understood by the administration. They keep on damaging or altering the environmental health by the name of so-called development. But that is not the development. When the environmental health is deteriorated, it will adversely affect the human health. Therefore, each and every country will have to spend more on the health issues. Now, for instance, if the by the sake of the development, if the air is polluted, what happened? The country will have more and more diseases relating to the maybe diseases related to the lungs, and if the water is polluted, there will be more patients relating to the kidney with the kidney disease and various other diseases. Then what will happen is that the development.
No, but environmental activists are silent about what's happening right now in the Port City project. They don't seem to be talking. They don't seem to be launching protests. No, actually, none of that has taken place over the last few years.
Yes, we witnessed number of protests against the Port City project.
That was before Port City was being built.
Yes, even since 2015, even we were fighting in the courts and outside. but we came to know that recently the the verdict has issued, but we were not invited. Even we are still struggling to obtain the court order and to see whether we should appeal against the court order. But from the environmentalist side, what you say is correct, but as the port city project commenced, most of the environmentalists are now not much concerned about the port city project.
Right. Thank you very much, Attorney at Law Ravindranath Dabari, Chairman of the Centre for Environmental Justice. Dr. Ajanta Pereira, once a presidential candidate, second a candidate at the general election, now sitting here today as an environmental scientist. Dr. Pereira, nice to have you on board. Are you satisfied the way in which the government is currently going through with its development plan, infrastructure development process, at the cost of the environment?
Well, I was listening to the president today as he was speaking at the Surakimu Ganga new project. And then when I was listening to what he was saying, I understood very well he has no clue about the environment. He does not know what environment is, and this is where the real problem lies, because he is saying the environmental resources are to be utilized for development. He wants to develop the environment. There's nothing like that. Environment exists, the air that we breathe exists for our sake. The water that resources we have in our country is for us for drinking and for other purposes. Then of course, the soil that we have is for growing crops and ensuring also that the plant growth is such that we strike a good balance, because the most important thing is, even if we become one of the richest countries in the world, we still need a country to where we can live healthily. Now, the very word that he was using was sustainable development of the environment. Now, the language that I have learned on environment is that you carry out sustainable development while protecting the environment. And I have a feeling that he is misled, because he doesn't seem to understand how to go about development, ensuring that he does not disturb the environment, because the environment, out of the two, the development and the environment is the most important. And this is where the environmental impact assessment plays a big role.
Dr. Pereira, interestingly, taking you back to a few days, the statement that was made by President Rajapaksa about how he has been championing the cause of protecting the environment and so on and so forth. There is a clear disparity, isn't it, between landscaping and protecting Sri Lanka's jungles?
Exactly, precisely. He is talking about building walkways for people. He is talking about developing waterways and so on. That's not, that is, you are actually touching the environment. And with that mindset, now he wants to build reservoirs in Sinharaja forest. He believes that Sinharaja forest exists for development. And until and unless somebody puts some good thoughts into his mind or stop him from doing that, he will end up destroying the whole of Sinharaja forest, and by that time it will be too late for us to say something. So basically, that's why I keep going back to EIA, the Environmental Impact Assessment, because there is a tool which is there for development of this nation. That is the environmental.
But that particular tool in question is being formulated based on the whim and fancy of the authorities in Sri Lanka, unfortunately, Dr. Pereira.
Sorry?
The environmental impact assessments are being formulated based on the whim and fancy of the authorities in order to pass projects, in order to conduct projects, in order to carry out projects in the country. Isn't this unfortunate?
That comes from the fact that in 2000, I believe, Jagat can correct me if I am wrong, 2000, there was a situation where they decided that the EIA reports will not be made public and the public participation would not be addressed. So this is where we need to change right now, because you see, the reason why we do an EIA, the reason why we do an environmental impact assessment is to see whether the project that we are discussing is something that is going to harm the environment. If so, there should be mitigatory measures, and we need to get the mindset of the people who are also affected, so that we also look into the alternatives. This is a fact, and I don't, to be very frank with you, I don't know where Mr. Mahinda Amaravira is, because the reason is he is the Minister for Environment. So the two of them, one side is the President, the other side is Mahinda Amaravira, the Environmental Minister, and the Chairman of the Central Environmental Authority, who is supposed to carry out the EIA, is very silent.
Right.
So this is where the problem, we are here.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ajanta Pereira, who's an environmental scientist, joining us this evening on the show. So I open the floor for questions from our journalists. On to my immediate right is Attorney at Law Sonali Vanigabadugge. On to my immediate left is Nadeem Majid, and on to my far left is Chaturanga Hapwaraji. Nice to have you on the show after a very long time, Chaturanga.
Thank you, Shamir.
However, let's give the lady the first opportunity to pose questions. So we start off with Sonali.
Thank you, Shamir. My first question I'd like to pose to Mr. Dabare. I'd like to start off with an introduction to the Bulankulama case, Bulankulama versus Secretary of Ministry of Industrial Development. In this landmark case, their lordships spoke about the public trust doctrine, sustainable development and protection of the environment in relation to the breach of fundamental rights, and they referred to the Stockholm Declaration and the Rio de Janeiro Declaration, and notably it said that natural resources of the people were held on trust for them by the government, and that the organs of the state are guardians to whom the people have committed the care and preservation of resources of the people. And the court did hold that there was an imminent infringement of fundamental rights of the petitioners. Now my question is, in Sri Lanka there are a multitude of laws, regulations and administrative structures in place to protect and conserve the environment. On the other hand, we also have a set of public-spirited individuals who are now aware that they need to protect and conserve the environment in the face of this massive destruction that we see documented before our very eyes. So my question to you is, Mr. Dabare, given the fact that in this Bulankulama case, also the case was brought by residents of Eppavala, such as cultivators, landowners, a chief incumbent of a temple. What is the case for the rise of public interest litigation in Sri Lanka?
In Sri Lanka, public interest litigation has developed to a certain extent, I must say. Now recently, after the Bulankulama case, as you clearly mentioned, there were a number of judgments which enrich the scope or widen the scope of the public interest litigation, and actually widen this scope of environmental protection. Even we can say the recent Chunnakam judgment, SCFR 141/2015, in that also there was a very interesting and very welcoming comments, and the judgment enlarging the scope of the environmental litigation and the public interest litigation, and even the failure to perform duties by the government officials in that particular judgment was considered as a violation of the fundamental right. And even the recent judgment of Vilpattu, the court itself shouldered certain responsibility of protecting environment and stated that the government responsibility of protecting the environment should be shouldered by the courts. Likewise, there is a comparatively there are some judgments could be treated as drawbacks of the developments of the public interest litigation, but there are some judgments which enlighten the scope.
So just to add on to that, Sonali, with your permission, of course, you spoke about the Vilpattu case that took place and the judgment that was passed on therein. So the judgment clearly states that the minister in charge, that was Rishad Badiuddin, had to replant the area that was uprooted or deforested in Vilpattu. However, that has not taken place.
Yeah, actually the judgment was not for him to reforest, but for him to bear the cost of reforestation. And
But has that happened?
yeah, actually the calculation to be done by the Forest Conservation Department, and Forest Conservation Department performed its duty, because within the time period of 2 months from the date of judgment, they were ordered to give the valuation and issue the valuation. Then they issued, but Mr. Badiuddin has not actually performed his duties, because after informing him about the valuation, he has to pay the amount indicated by the Forest Department within 1 month. That is how the judgment states. But recently we were informed, but we actually, Center for Environmental Justice filed that case. I was the counsel in that matter, and recently we were informed that he has appealed against the order, but we were still not, we have not been served with the papers of the appeal.
Mr. Jagat Gunawardena, with regard to biodiversity conservation specifically, there are enactments such as the Fauna and Flora Protection Ordinance, the Forest Conservation Ordinance, the National Heritage Wilderness Areas Act. All of these and more try to act as a protection mechanism to in environmental conservation. However, despite all of these protection mechanisms, we see the manner in which there is large scale environmental damage and destruction being carried out on a daily basis. So where are the loopholes in your opinion?
There are three factors that are involved in a good law and order situation, and one factor is strong laws. So coming to the three enactments that you mentioned, the Fauna and Flora Protection Ordinance is the strongest, because all the offences under the Fauna and Flora Protection Ordinance are deemed to be cognizable offences, and some offences are non-bailable as such. When it comes to the Forest Conservation Ordinance, that's also a rather strong ordinance under which a large number of forest areas has been protected. And when it comes to the National Heritage Wilderness Areas Act, only the Sinharaja forest had been protected so far. Now coming to the situation of the law, you can see that the Fauna and Flora Protection Ordinance is very strong, and that is the main enactment that gives protection both to habitats and species of animals and species of plants. Then the other laws are also quite strong, but the problem that we always have been saying is that the mechanism to enforce the law is very weak. The total field strength of the Forest Department is less than 1,000, and so is the strength of the Wildlife Department. And when you look at the extent of land that is to be controlled by these departments, and also the other duties like checking the timber or protecting the animals outside protected areas, we can see that the total strength of these departments is woefully inadequate to do it.
Right.
My personal calculation is that the Wildlife Department should at least have 6,000 personnel in the field at least to do a proper job of work. So that is the first criteria that prevents the law from being effectively enforced. The second is that the resources that are available for the departments to carry out their duties and functions is also minimal. There are many areas where the officers does not have even an official vehicle to go and confiscate some matter that has been illegally collected or illegally done. And when we sometimes complain, the moment they mobilize the vehicles and other resources and go for the raid, the perpetrators would have taken their booty and come out of the area.
No, but Mr. Gunawardena, that saying about not having adequate amount of personnel in the wildlife to nab environmental destruction. That argument cannot be bought by the general public, because let's talk about Wilpath for an example. When so much of land was being deforested, was the wildlife department sleeping?
I will answer that question. The area that was cleared was not really Wilpattu, but forests north of Wilpattu. So we were giving the real names of these areas like Marichakadu and Kallaru, and this name Wilpattu was coined by people with political affiliations later on, and that was the basis for this confusion. So the wildlife department was not responsible for Marichakadu or for Kallaru and the other areas that were cleared. And to be fair by the departments, I should say that these lands were given in a manner that was very arbitrary and illegal by the authorities themselves, and that is what was quashed by the court order.
The issue is, Mr. Gunawardhan, I'm sorry to pose questions to you like this, but with a lot of respect to you. When there is one coconut tree or even a jackfruit tree is being felled in a house, you have the Central Environmental Authority individuals, divisional secretariat areas, personnel coming and saying you can't fell those trees without having proper permission. But we're talking about an area, Kallaru and Marichkaru, these areas that you were talking about, the land was being cleared.
Yeah, but that was the exact question that I was trying to answer.
Let's forget about the wildlife department. What was the divisional secretariat areas doing?
No,
what
the
was
problem
those
was
personnel
that
doing
they
at that
were
time?
given by the Presidential Task Force on Resettlement, and then the Department of Forest was unable to carry out their functions and duties, and that was the matter that was challenged by the Center for Environmental Justice, that situation that is not really legal as we saw it, and the situation had been upheld by the courts that it was not legal to give that land like that, because that was part of the reserved forests that were declared as Marichakadu and Kallaru.
But that came after so much of destruction to the environment.
Yes, of course, when the authorities are prevailing over the mandate of the departments, when there is political interference, that was the question that I was trying to come into. But before that you asked the other question. So there are two other factors that prevent the department from doing their jobs properly, and one of them is political interference and official interferences, and the second one is corruption. So I was trying to come into those two areas before you asked the other question. So in Kallaru and Marichakadu and the adjoining areas, what really happened was that the legal mandate of the departments were usurped by other departments and Presidential Task Force, who issued letters preventing the officers from carrying out the duty. It's not the Wildlife Department who had the mandate over this area. The confusion is that the Wilpattu is a national park protected by the Wildlife Department, whereas the areas that were cleared were reserved forests controlled by the Department of Forest. So ultimately,
is this bureaucratic setup effective in having a separate department of wildlife conservation and a separate forest conservation department, and now you have cabinet ministry for wildlife? There's a different minister, so you have Minister C.B. Ratnayaka, who's in charge, I believe, of the wildlife cabinet ministry, and then you have Mr. Amravira, who's the minister in charge for environment. Then you have a state ministry with quite a long name that I can't remember, which also sort of looks over some functions of the forest conservation department and some functions. I mean, who is reporting to whom and who is ultimately responsible? It seems like this has been deliberately made vague.
yeah, you had asked two questions. First, I will answer the first question. That is, the Wildlife Department and the Forest Department coexisted since 1949, and there was not much of an issue because they were under two different enactments and they were complementing each other. For instance, the Fauna and Flora Protection Ordinance came into being in 1937 and was effective since 1938, but the Department of Wildlife came into being only in 1949. So till then, the Forest Department was entrusted in carrying out the duties and functions of the Wildlife Department. And after the Wildlife Department was established, the same regulation is there and still there, so that allows the Forest Department also to fulfill some of the functions of the Wildlife Department if there is a
So
problem.
where is the problem now?
Now let me come to it. The second question that you posed is the recent gazette that that provided the functions and duties of the different ministries. Now, to be very fair, I still am in a wilderness to see who has the authority over what. Let me elaborate. The Cabinet Minister for Wildlife and Forest is Mr. C.V. Ratnayaka, but the two departments, the Department of Forest Conservation and the Department of Wildlife Conservation, is under the State Minister of a long title which includes both wildlife, forest.
That's Mr. Vimalavira
Disanayaka. So I am still at a confused point how the Cabinet Minister can put a cabinet paper and get a cabinet decision.
How can the Cabinet Minister make any statement about wildlife and forest conservation when the two departments that are responsible are not gazetted under him? They are under the State Ministry.
I feel sorry sometimes about him because he is the Cabinet Minister, so he has to be responsible to the rest of the ministries about what is happening. And the other tragic situation is that if he wants to put a regulation, he has to put the cabinet paper, but after the cabinet paper is approved and when the regulation is also approved and put to parliament by him, he can't give an order to the departments because they are not under him.
So it's a very scientific method. Dr. Sevandi, I want to talk to you about this issue of reforestation. We're talking about how court had ordered in the Wilpattu case or in the Marichakadu Kallaru case has ordered then Minister Rishad Badyuddin to bear the cost of reforestation. We recently saw how with the announcement of the two reservoirs to be built inside Sinharaja, according to Minister Tamal Rajapaksa, that for every acre that is lost, we're going to reforest 100 acres elsewhere, something along those lines. Or was it every 5 acres, 100 acres? I mean, is that conservation? Isn't that coming back to what what Samir was referring to earlier? This is landscaping, not environmental conservation.
Yes, let's get the facts very correct. One of the myths that this country is living with is that we are very proud of the fact that we are living in a biodiversity hotspot. I keep talking about this because this is something we need to get very straight. The fact itself that we are living in a biodiversity hotspot indicates that in order to be identified and recognized as a biodiversity hotspot, it indicates that more than 70% of the original primary vegetation of that country is lost. So from the moment we got into the category of a biodiversity hotspot, that basically indicates that we've not been doing the business properly. The crust of the problem is that despite the fact that we are a biodiversity hotspot, the other criteria that enabled us to get into that position has always been ignored. While I mentioned that 70% of the original vegetation is lost, the other criteria that enables us to become a biodiversity hotspot is the presence of at least 0.5% of the flowering plants as endemics to this country. So we have to be proud from one side that being a small country we have such a biodiversity. The problem is that for a long time we've been systematically clearing the vegetation, systematically clearing the forest, basically because the land was available and that forest was always looked at as the option to go for new land. The option of looking at how to optimize what we already have cleared, where we are already settled in, where we have already settled in, has never been looked at. That's where the problem is. And the third problem is, as you clearly mentioned, that we are now talking about big destruction. But for me, for a long time, at least in my lifetime, what I've seen is a gradual destruction which was happening right in front of us in plain sight, which we never bothered about, because we always thought that there's too many fish, we can never fish the ocean. There's too many trees that we can never cut them and finish off the forest. So we were blind. But now we talk about it basically because it has for the first time started affecting us, humans, not the biodiversity. We are worried and we are talking about it because the services that the environment, the forest rendered to us are being challenged. And we still don't talk about it in terms of biodiversity. We talk about in terms of the environmental services that we tend to lose.
So Dr. Sevan, the President's statement about discussing about environmental conservation as a fashion statement is not something that you'll buy.
I don't think environmental conservation is a fashion statement. At least I know that there are a lot of people, not just here in Sri Lanka, but globally, that are passionate about the environment, not because it's something that they love visiting and enjoying over a weekend, because they understand about the environmental services and the importance of having it.
Is this a minority or a majority, Dr. Sevan?
Well, that's a really good question. The difference between the minority and the majority comes with one thing. Let's take Wilpattu case for an example. We had a majority talking about it. Why is that? That's basically because many people felt a threat. So the point where you have the majority coming in is either through awareness or either personally feeling the loss. But I always see a minority that have a deep passion for the environment and also a deep understanding. What I always say is that minority have a responsibility of disseminating that knowledge so that you have others join into you, so that we talk about the environment not as a different part but as an integral part, and we being a part of it.
Mr. Dabare, when you're talking about Sinharaja, the specific project of the two reservoirs,
Brother, if you don't mind, can we pose a question to Dr. Ajanta Pereira and then
actually, yes. Actually, Dr. Ajanta, I'd like your input on this as well. When we talk about Sinharaja, that specific project of the two reservoirs, when you're cutting down trees, you're not just cutting down trees, you're destroying the homes of the species, the many endemic species, they call that home. So this is what I don't get about the minister's reforestation plan elsewhere, because what is he going to do about the loss of the amphibious, the endemic amphibious species, the endemic freshwater fish, the insect life that call the Sinharaja Reserve home? Is he going to create them?
Well, the thing is, you need to understand the difference between a tree and an ecosystem. I think this is where the people are making a big mistake. An ecosystem is not something that you can rejuvenate. Once you touch an ecosystem, it's gone forever. Because an ecosystem is where you have an integrated network between the plants and the animals. And so when you talk about animals, they are the large animals as well as the microorganisms. So when you look at Sinharaja, Sinharaja is an interwoven food system, food webs, and ecosystem, and you cannot ever replace it. You can't touch it and then say, I'm really sorry about this, let's grow plants. I mean, I saw recently the president planting a tree somewhere and saying that I am doing environmental work. Rubbish. Because one tree will provide food for someone and will take up some carbon dioxide and take some water from the soil and will make some food. But an ecosystem sustains life. And Sinharaja forest, the reason why we are screaming about Sinharaja is because it's a rainforest. And all the rain that we get in Sri Lanka is through the Sinharaja forest. And now we are depending on hydropower. Because Sri Lanka is 21% or 23% is dependent on hydropower. So eventually, if we touch Sinharaja forest and we have a little rain, eventually what will happen is we will have to bring all the coal power plants from China, the used ones, just like they sent the Norocholi, the used plant. So this is where we are leading. I mean, it's not about Sinharaja alone. It's about grabbing the country.
Madam, you bring us to an interesting point. Now, you speak about the water resources, especially the Sinharaja region, and from the studies that have been carried out in the past, we have identified, everyone knows that there is high quality water available in that region. Now, we are looking at various countries also drawing their attention to Sri Lanka with regard to the specific resource, water. Now, there are a lot of countries that are buying water from other nations. If that is the case, is that why there is a lot of attention on Sinharaja at the moment?
Yeah,
because
it could very
a lot of politicians are also involved in this.
Yeah, they are always after money, you know, so they would also be involved. I mean, basically, now if you look at USA, where do they get the money from? Fiji Islands. They are tapping on the water in Fiji Islands because it's a very clean country. So basically what is really going to happen is, it's not about the reservoir. I mean, if you build a reservoir in Sinharaja Foreign, that's the end of the story. And I don't think anybody would give permission for someone to build a reservoir. I mean, the president can be dreaming for the rest of his life, it would not happen. Then the second thing is, the moment you tap the water in Sinharaja, they will start bottling. They will start bottling the water and sending it abroad to earn some money, and that's where the politicians come. They would see the money in it and they will want to do that. So basically, don't touch Sinharaja. This is a message.
But Dr. Perera, Chaturanga made a very interesting point now. Haven't we learned any lesson from the Umayyad project, where we want to give water to Iran, and that project has now come to a complete standstill at a cost unbearable to the environment? Absolutely, absolutely.
And but the thing is, you see, this is where Mr. Badruddin, now, you know, whoever touches a natural resource and destroys it during their lifetime, right, they need to pay for it, because they are not forever ministers, no. Now this we don't have in Sri Lanka, the responsibility, and this is where the lawyers come in. We need to develop a system when a minister in power, if he makes a mistake, then he has to pay for it. Because Sinharaja, it doesn't belong to me or you, it belongs to the next generation. The children who are born to this country need to see Sinharaja, they need to see elephants.
Mr. Dabade, now the situation pertaining to this being a World Heritage Site, and now people are carrying out various projects in the area that was extended adjacent to the Sinharaja. This is where former President Maithripala Sirisena said this needs to be extended, and there was a new area that was gazetted. Now when people go and carry out various projects like this, what is going to happen to the World Heritage status of the Sinharaja? Is there going to be an effect on it? Because bit by bit we are going to lose the Sinharaja forest as a whole, and does that have an impact on the fact that the world recognizes this as a heritage site?
Definitely it will have a huge impact on the recognition and the World Heritage state. And in addition to that, I must state that the Sinharaja is governed by the Act National Heritage Wilderness Areas Act number 3 of 1988. Under that act, we see section 4 deals with certain prohibitions in a area like Sinharaja, because under this act only the Sinharaja is declared as a wilderness area now. It says no person shall in National Heritage Wilderness Area cut grass or pasture cattle, pollute water, remove, uproot or destroy or cause any damage or injury to any plant, and specifically say clear or break up any land for cultivation or any other purpose.
The law is available.
Law is available and it's prohibited. Nobody can construct reservoirs in the Sinharaja according to the law. That
but the statement is made by a senior minister. The statement follows up by saying there is a project that is going on, the Gingnilwala project. The facts are laid out to the general public. This is made by a person who is not a new person to parliament. This is a senior politician in the country. So when that happens, the argument that is raised by the common man is genuine. You can genuinely question, this is said by so and so. Then we can also question, will it actually happen, and then will it result in the World Heritage status of the Sinharaja being lifted all at at once, because we are allowing these politicians to make statements like this. You say the law is available, but when we go and check, there are actually projects also happening. We saw this in the recent past. So something is wrong somewhere.
Yes, actually, first of all, the rule of law must prevail. That is what the Vilpattu judgment also, the court has very clearly stated that rule of law is paramount. Even though Presidential Task Force has decided to alienate the lands, even though the Conservator General of Forest has signed it for the alienation, the court has said the rule of law must be the paramount importance, should be given the paramount importance and should be prevailed in the country. Therefore, when the law prescribes or restricts certain activities, even the politicians as well as the public and the followers of the politicians, they should abide by the provision.
Mr. Dabre, why is the rule of law not being upheld? Is it because of delays in justice? Like you mentioned, for example, that you've been informed that Honorable Minister, former Minister Badruddin has appealed against the decision, and therefore the payment has not been made, although the Forest Conservation Department has assessed what the cost is going to be. But you also said that he's appealed it, but as one of the plaintiffs, you're yet to receive the documents notifying you that the decision has been appealed against, and it's been some time. So
yes,
how do we address these delays in the justice system?
Yes, actually, that's a issue, because normally when an appeal from the Court of Appeal to the Supreme Court is lodged, it takes certain time to the court registry to send the notices. But
why does it take so long? Is my question. Why is it taking so long?
We also worried, and we bothered, and even we checked with the registry, and still we could not find it out.
But when you check, what is the explanation that the registry gives you? Why is it taking so long?
The registry says still the registry could not locate the file. Actually, that was the answer.
Mr. Dabre, we are living in the digital age. We are living through the information technology revolution.
Yeah, we
and
will
you're
wait,
telling me the court registry can't locate a case
the
file.
Organization, the petitioners organization, the organization has decided wait for some time, and if the petitioners or the petitioner organization doesn't obtain or receive the papers, we will re-agitate the issue in the courts, and we will take necessary steps to.
But you see that this is a huge problem, isn't it? For rule of law to prevail, justice must also be swift. Because if justice is not swift, then there is no rule of law.
Yes, that problem is there. Justice delayed is justice denied. That is a very famous statement or saying in the operation of the law. I totally agree with you, because but in our system there are a lot of delays. Even we see that recently we filed a case against the recent circular issued by the Secretary of Wildlife Ministry, bequeath in the forest land or west in the forest land with the land commission, but still we are struggling with the court process to obtain the required orders.
So, interestingly, you mentioned before that we have the legal tools required. Sonali also pointed out several acts and brought to your attention as well. However, do you believe that we have adequate laws in Sri Lanka to prosecute and bring to justice those who destroy the environment?
It's a broad question. So if I may narrow it down to the three enactments mentioned by her, yes, we have adequate laws to bring miscreants who destroy the biological diversity of this country to justice. But when it comes to other enactments, like the National Environment Act, which has not been amended for the past 30 years or more, these acts are in dire need of being revamped and brought up to date. So if I answer the broader question posed by you, the answer is both yes and no. In certain areas the law is quite strong, but in other areas the law is outdated and needs to be upgraded to meet the present situation or the present scenario.
Mr. Gunawardhan, recently on our Lakshapati program, a teenager shared her opinion or voiced her concerns about the deforestation in the Sinharaja Forest Reserve, it brought to my mind the government's swift response to it was very similar to the Sinhala idiom which says, Puhul hora karin dene. So, what is your opinion with regard to government's swift action or swift response to a statement that was made by a young teenage girl who was just saying about what she saw in front of her house?
Well, I justify her position because under Article 28 of the Constitution, everyone has a duty and obligation to protect the environment. So, I would say that this obligation extends to voicing an opinion about the destruction or what she has witnessed, to bring the attention of the authorities or the general public to the plight of the environment. So, she is quite justified in airing her views or what she had witnessed to the wider public. So, I stand by her on that account. The puzzling thing is, if she had made a statement, the authorities should have gone after the miscreants, not hounding her. So, my question here or my worry here is that rather than going behind the miscreants and bringing them to justice, the government was trying to hound her out and trying to find fault with her. That's a wrong approach, because we all depend on our future generations and we have to empower and strengthen the future generation to come forward and assert their rights.
Mr. Gunadhan, we are at a very interesting point. Now, last Friday, you were also at an event that was held at the Vihara Mahadevi Park, where a lot of youth organizations, youth wings of major wildlife protection bodies had come together and organized an awareness campaign for people to be educated about the ecocide that is happening in our country and global warming. However, you were also there when certain incidents happened. It was almost as if it was not welcome. Now, this was sort of bringing art together, various forms of expression, but again, the same problem. There are people trying to make other people aware of what is happening. Not everyone feels the same way about the environment, but there are people who are trying to show others, this is what's happening, understand, this is important. But when that happens, if there is sort of an embargo or a barricade towards that, then Mr. Gunadhan, again the problem persists. This cycle is going to go on, don't you think?
Let me clarify something about your statement. I was not there when that hoarding was removed, and the second thing is, I don't usually join public protest or such events, but I made an exception in this particular instance because it was the youth, as I said before, the future of this country, who were making a statement, and their voice should be allowed to be heard across the country. So, when they are hindered from making their legitimate voice being heard, as a member of the public and a senior citizen as such, I thought it is my duty and obligation to go and show my solidarity with those youth. And if I had been a father, I would have had children of that age. Although I am a bachelor, I still feel for the children in the larger context. So that's why I went there, making an exception from the general situation. So I was not there when that incident happened, and I still believe that they had obtained necessary permission under the National Environment Act and the regulations, and where the regulations had empowered the Colombo Municipal Council in this particular instance to issue a permit to have a hoarding or an advertisement. So they had obtained the permit. I saw the letter and I saw that something really wrong has happened, and that's one reason I went there, to boost their morale and to show my solidarity. Now the wider question is, yes, I always expect that everyone has a duty and obligation to protect the environment as per Article 28, and we should give them the legitimate space to express their opinion. So these people are not trying to sabotage the government or trying to make trouble or create a situation where there will be a law and order breakdown. They were trying to make a statement on a global climate action day. So it was really not
a local issue.
They were trying to commemorate the global day in the local context, and that mural had nothing to do with it, because what they had depicted was the possibility of Vihara Mahadevi Park being cut down in a possible future scenario, and if so, what would have happened? And the concept of ecocide again is twofold. One is the international law dimension, where certain parties, especially the British legal experts, are trying to why the international bodies to amend the Rome Convention and bring ecocide as another crime against humanity like genocide. So that's one aspect. The second aspect is the local legal positions of several countries or many countries, and it started off with Vietnam incidentally in 1984, where they had put the crime known as ecocide as part of the local legal regime. And in the context of Sri Lanka, what I see is that although we don't call it by the name ecocide, it is still a crime to destroy the ecosystems, destroy certain species of animals and certain species of plants. So
Well, why does the government get flustered about issues like this?
Well, it's a enigma to me. It's only the government who should know why they are coming up, or certain segments of the government who are coming out with such knee-jerk reactions. So that shows a degree of paranoia on their part, which should not be the case, because I think any legitimate government should be happy about the people, and especially the young people, trying to assert their right in a peaceful, non-violent, democratic manner.
So you were at this location, as Chaturanga pointed out, and you said that you went there for a few minutes in support or in solidarity with what was going on. Did you see any environmental destruction? Because one of the police officers who were there on that location said that there was environmental destruction as a result of this ecocide, that was the mural that was being put up. Did you see anything of that sort?
No, I didn't see anything. And it was the municipal commissioner, if I am correct, who had made that kind of statement, not the police officer, it's a municipal commissioner.
That's right.
It was very strange to come from a person, from the very body that had given permission to it. And it's also strange that there are so much destruction of trees in the Colombo city itself that is happening, which is not seen. But she was finding fault with tying some ropes to the trees. But of course, there are so many illegal incidents when it comes to the same regulation that had happened all around Colombo. So that's something a person who can prove through a RTI request to the municipal council about the permission that had been taken by them for other such things. But that's not my question. My question here is, why are the authorities feeling threatened by a democratic action by a group of teenagers and young adults, whereas we should encourage them to come forward, because we are, as I said before, we are in a country where the law and order situation cannot be tackled by the meager resources of the state bodies, and we all have a responsibility and duty. So one charge that I am making against the general society over the decades is that the society was non-assertive. The society was lethargic about their own rights. And when we see...
But better late than never. Now they are. Now they are very vocal about what's going on, as Dr.
that's exactly the point that I was trying to make. So when the society is waking up to its responsibilities and duties, at least the younger generation being more passionate or more alive to the rights and obligations placed upon them, we should encourage them to do it. And as long as they are doing it in a democratic manner, as long as they are doing it in a legal manner within the mandate of the law, we should give them all support. And that's the exact reason why I went there, to show their solidarity.
Thank you very much.
May I be permitted to add something, because I also was there and participated for the demonstration of the importance of the environment. As Mr. Dr. Gunawardena said, I am also not normally taking part in demonstrations, because my way of doing it, because I believe in the legal action. Normally I am engaged in awareness campaigns and lot of lectures and court work, but I do not take part in demonstrations. But when a democratic demonstration and awareness campaign is hindered or attacked, I also felt that I should be there, and I participated. And I must say that I would like to draw the attention of all of you to the Article 27(14) of the Constitution, and it says the its state shall protect, preserve and improve the environment for the benefit of the community. It is the duty of the state to protect and preserve the environment. When the younger generation is performing the or doing the duties of the state should welcome them, state should embrace such demonstrations and such awareness campaigns.
However, Mr. Dabra, isn't it tragic that these directive principles can't be enforced in a court of law?
No, now the law has changed, as I earlier stated with the Chunnakam judgment.
So these directive principles?
These directive principles are not wasted according to the judgment, and with the the directive principles should be given effect by the state according to the recent judgment of the Supreme Court.
Right. Dr. Ajanta, my next question is to you, but prior to the question, I'd like to take some time to quote from the Chief Seattle's letter to former US President. This letter says, "The President in Washington sends word that he wishes to buy our land. But how can you buy or sell the sky, the land? The idea is strange to us. The shining water that moves in the streams and rivers is not just water, but the blood of our ancestors. The earth does not belong to man, man belongs to the earth. All things are connected like the blood that unites us all. Man did not weave the web of life, he is merely a strand in it. Whatever he does to the web, he does to himself." Now, in light of this, which we learnt when we were in school, you've been doing a lot of environmental awareness programs throughout. For years and years you've been doing this. My question to you is, what is the role of education in enabling ecological justice?
Well, actually, I'm really happy in a way that in today what we are seeing from Bhagya, what we are seeing from the kids who are at the Vihara Mahadevi, is because we already have something called environmental clubs in schools, and the children are taught and they are given certificates. There are programs that are going on already in school level. So the environmental education is happening in Sri Lanka at the moment. Now, if you move on to the university, there are bachelors, masters in environmental education. I think what has happened over the years is that the people have got educated on environment, but those who take decisions, especially the parliamentarians, unfortunately, the parliamentarians don't have a clue about the environment. They don't know what environment is, and I think we can see so many of that being talked about right now. So I firmly believe that educating the public alone is not going to help, because whoever is going to the parliament also need to know to strike a balance between the environmental protection and economic development, because we need both. We need economic development. I mean, even this government who is talking about economic development, or whoever it may be, what have they done? We don't have economic development in Sri Lanka. I mean, how many industrial estates have come up in the last few years? There's nothing much happening. I mean, our younger people, where are they going to get their jobs? So we need economic development. And even though I'm an environmental scientist, I'm a firm believer on economic development. But the problem is, we need to understand, while we develop the country economically, we need to protect the environment, simply because every child born to this country need to have clean air to breathe, need to have clean water to drink, need to have good food to eat. These are the needs of a person, and that's what the Constitution says. The Constitution says the President and the Cabinet needs to ensure that the citizen has all the things that they require.
So with respect to the question on educating our future generations, you think that there should be an addendum where we also educate our policymakers, our parliamentarians?
Precisely. I mean, to be very frank with you, I would be very happy. I would offer my services right now to go to the parliament and to educate them on environment. At least we can minimize the damage that they are doing already to the country. Because the reason being, this is exactly what should happen. What I firmly believe is, okay, people love different people, they like to send different people to the parliament, and that's fine. So those who are going 225, those including the president, you know, they should be taught an environment, there should be crash courses, there should be awareness programs happening within inside the parliament on economic development. Many of them don't even know what economic development is, and they don't know how to protect the environment, they don't even know what constitution is. So those things should be taught to them, at least make them good at taking decisions, because we need to take decisions very fast, we need to develop the country, we need to get rid of the debt. These are the needs of the hour. So, you know, this is why the problem with the Sinharaja, all of us are sitting here talking about Sinharaja, but the key people who are taking the decisions might be having dinner somewhere, and might be, you know, taking a decision tomorrow on something they don't even understand about.
Dr.
So,
Savandi, do you think, in your opinion, do you think the government is serious about the environment?
Can I come to that question by adding something to what Dr. Ajanta had been talking about? Because I myself is an educator, so I really want to sort of like air certain opinions about the problem of the education
Of course, go
itself.
ahead.
Because for a long time, we have been having environment as an agenda in our education. But the problem now that we see is that education, environmental component in education is to make knowledgeable people. What we need in this country are not just knowledgeable people. We need people that are empathetic about the environment, not sympathetic. The problem between the sympathy and empathy is that sympathetic sort of population will be agitated for a certain problem, and once the problem subdues, sympathy would also subdue. But if you create a force, let it be the younger generation, let it be us, let it be the people in the parliament, if they are empathetic and if they have the right attitude, then I don't think we would be talking about most of the things that we are talking here. The problem there is that our curriculums have focused heavily on making us remember the numbers, like the number of endemic species, what's the name of this particular species, where it is found. But we have not thought of making the public of Sri Lanka and even the learned people empathetic about it. Now, to that I also want to add the point that we always really heavily criticize politicians and talk about their absence of knowledge about conservation. We've been talking here about Uma project. Both myself and Mr. Gunawardena knows very well when it comes to Uma project, the shoddy job that was done with the EIA document. And that EIA document didn't come from just normal people, it came from the elite, educated scientists of this country. So when you have educated but not empathic people pumping information, you are expected to get this kind of situation. So for me, what I see is we really need to look at not just at the education, but also how do we pump that education.
But the problem is,
I'd like to say something about
Sorry, Doctor.
that you know, the EIA issue is this. Now when people write an EIA, environmental impact assessment report, the consultants are paid. Generally they are paid by the project itself. So the person who brings the project is the one who also pays for the consultants. So eventually, no matter who those consultants are, they write the report in such a way that the project can go through. And this has been our biggest problem in the country. It's not about whether they are feeling for the environment. It's more about the money factor.
so how important is it, Dr. Savandi, to have these EIAs transparent and open to the public? Because I know very well during the Umayya project, as you correctly mentioned, the environmental impact assessment was done by a group of elitists who call themselves the people who will sanction the project per se. And it was not only approved at one level, it was approved in at least multiple levels, and that is how the project went ahead, and a total mess at the end of the day. So how important is it to have these EIAs transparent and open to the public for debate?
EIAs are transparent and are open to public. The problem is that most of the people are not aware about it. There's very few people in this country, even the educated people, that knows at what level and what are the gates that are open for you to provide comments, and also even to how to access an EIA, your rights in reading it and submission of your opinions. And it is the IEE, that initial environmental examination, where perhaps the public is not consulted. But when it comes to an EIA, it's mandatory that the community and the other stakeholders that are likely to be affected are consulted, and that their opinion is taken and mitigatory measures are looked into. But the problem is this: the problem lies in the fact who identifies who are the stakeholders, who are the real stakeholders. For an example, in any project, let's say it's a project related to a river. If you think the stakeholders that are going to be affected are living in the periphery, you are wrong. People that are going to be affected by a development in a certain locality may come from every place. It can be the stakeholders may be global. The stakeholders may be living in an entirely different place. So what really needs is that while we are having this momentum of wanting to talk about environment, discuss about environment, need to engage about environment, we also need to educate ourselves about what are the avenues that are already created by the law itself for us to get engagement. Because I know personally, for many cases, the amount of public opinion that is sent for very crucial EIAs are like
now, what is the status of the Umayya project?
I must add, because most of the law says the public opinion may be obtained. But according to my experience, we have sent number of opinions with regard to number of EIAs, even no response. Even we have not been responded, at least the receipt of the opinion. That is because the law says the project approving agency may consider.
So it's like pouring water to a duck's back.
No, it's useless. That provision is not, according to my experience, it is not utilized, because
and also it should be published in the newspaper, both in all in Sinhala, Tamil and English, that the EIA report is available with the district secretaries or the divisional secretaries. This has not happened for so long now.
So, Dr. Sarvandi, getting back into my earlier question, how serious is the government? And then I also want to ask you about the status of the Umayya project now, because I remember a couple of years ago when President Sirisena visited Iran, one of the supreme leaders in Iran's earnest appeal to President Sirisena was to complete the construction of the Umayya project and honor that agreement. So I want to ask you about that as well. But how serious is the government on the environment?
I may not be the best person to ask that question, how serious is the government, but I think when you can look at that problem in two or rather three different aspects. The seriousness comes from the presence of law, as Dr. Jagat Gunawardhan mentioned. The presence of law in this country is adequate. But then you come to the point of implementation of that law and the forces that are available to implement them. I think the problem is not the presence of law, the problem is about the seriousness of implementing the law with the present infrastructure that is available. I don't see we have that many infrastructure sort of like enforcing agents, personnel to enforce them at the relevant agencies to do the job correctly. That has crippled the system, because if you take any EIA, one of the chapters is monitoring and evaluation, because every EIA is supposed to look at the severity of the issue and the likely impacts, and also come up with mitigatory measures. But then for so many years what we've seen is these the proposals that are being laid down in an EIA as options to mitigate the likely impacts are never implemented, are never monitored. Why is that? Is it because of the absence of the law? No, it's not. It's because our agencies are crippled because of the absence of infrastructure, as well as
so what is the status of the Umayo project?
corruption.
Because we're talking about deforestation in Sinharaja, we're talking about Kallaru, we're talking about the rubber canoe issue as well. We speak about a lot of issues that are contemporary now, but we've forgotten the Umayo project, which has a lot of environmental impact to those living in surrounding areas. So what is the status of that now?
I think the damage is already done. We all have to agree that Umayo project is a project that shouldn't have ever been in that locality. I think as we speak, the damage is already done, and half the damage is very much irreversible, and it's a fact. I'm not at all sure whether the project is going to go ahead or not, but what I'm seeing is it's very much like clearing a pristine environment and half building something and leaving it as it is now. The services are not there, the environment is not there, and what are we going to do?
Sad, isn't it?
It is a
sad.
very sad
Just
situation.
imagine that happens to the reservoir in Sinharaja forest. I mean, this is the responsibility factor. Now when she was talking about the monitoring plan, the whole purpose of the monitoring plan in a project is to ensure, because every project is given a license, right? So the license has to be renewed. Now if the license is to be renewed, the monitoring plan has to be implemented. Somebody has to monitor it before they can actually renew the license. But this shows in this country, without even looking at the monitoring plan, without even monitoring, that the license will be renewed, and this is what's happening. So this is where we say, before an ever important project is taken, the EIA has to be done, but the EIA process itself has to be ensured that the public participation must take place.
I'm going to ask you a very political question, Dr. Pera. What is with the Rajapaksa governments and reservoirs?
And with the?
And reservoirs, building reservoirs, building reservoirs.
Building with this?
Building reservoirs, like
reservoirs. Well, maybe it's going to bring some money for them. I mean, they are building a lot of roads today. Ever since this government comes into be, all what they do is to build roads, because it brings some income for them. So what I feel is this: they have no right to play with the natural resources that belong to our children for the generations, and they are here only for 5 years. So during that time, if they damage the environment, then they have to pay back. But what we need to remember is, the people in this country or the parliamentarians have already said yes to the 20th amendment, which says that you can't take him to courts again. So he has already says, that basically, I will have nothing to do with this. So we need to be very careful. If we can't take a person to courts, if we can't get him to pay back, why are we allowing him to do all these projects and do whatever he wants to do?
But we are the very people who elected 140 members of the SLPP to parliament. And why are we complaining now?
Who voted for them?
You tell me, Dr. Ajanta. It's a majority of the people who voted in favor of them, 6.9 million people.
9 million people voted for?
6.9 million people voted in favor of...
voted this government into the parliament. So at the moment we can't find anyone who has voted. I mean, whoever we talk to, they say they are not sure whether they really voted for them. So I think at the end of the day, the problem is with us. If we see that the president himself and the cabinet are functioning badly, in the sense, I'm not saying they are bad in every sense, but at least in environmental damage.
What are they good at?
Well, the basic reason I believe is, now during election time, they need money for the election. So a lot of people will give them something in order for them to do the election. Now this is a payback time. So in order to pay back, they pay back in terms of land. And the poor elephants are running to the villages because they don't have any land to live in.
Thank you very much. Mr.
And shall I add
Gunawardena.
something to the monitoring aspect spoken by Dr. Ajanta, because most of the environmental destruction that has taken place in our country actually has taken place or is taken place due to poor monitoring of the relevant authorities, because most of the relevant authorities have now become only license issuing officers, and they are these relevant officials are only doing the jobs of the clerks of issuing permits. And next year they when the permit holder comes and get it renewed, and they just idle. With the permit, the polluter keeps on polluting, and when the relevant even the nearby people complain, they say we have a license. Then the police and the other authorities, they also helpless, and they don't go beyond that.
So, Mr. Abri, what is the solution to this issue? How do we ensure that there is a better monitoring mechanism? Because, I mean, just throwing resources at it will probably not help. How are you going to ensure that these officials actually
according to my view, we should set up local monitoring bodies, or village level or local level monitoring, environmental monitoring, community based organizations or societies which is empowered by the Central Environment Authority or any other authority to report them. If the Central Environment Authority or the government authority cannot engage in monitoring, at least with maybe the Grama Sevaka, police officer or clergy and environmentalist in the area, and maybe the AG, DES, right? There should be a committee formed to monitor the environmental issues and for the purpose of environmental monitoring, and they should be given the powers of reporting it to the relevant authorities.
Mr. Dabare and Mr. Gunawardena, I'd like your perspectives on this. When we speak of environmental conservation, most often than not, there is no starting point and ending point. So what about inter-country cooperation when it comes to environmental protection? For example, if we take the destructive and unsustainable practice of bottom trawling, which was initially banned in 2017 in Sri Lanka, but fishermen in the north and east of the country and Indian fishermen, there is this constant rift that goes on. So that's just one example. Instead of developing a sustainable fishing economy and industry, we now need to also go into the negative impacts of these kinds of destructive practices. So can you speak to us about how inter-country cooperation works in terms of environmental conservation and protection? Mr. Gunawardena and then Mr. Dabare.
There may be regional agreements and there may be international agreements to protect the environment of inter-country cooperation. You cited a very good example where the failure of the Indian authorities to control their fishermen has caused a big problem to Sri Lanka. And the moment our authorities tried to assert the authority by arresting them, some people in India get agitated and try to release the fishermen. So for the sake of having nice inter-country relationships or good relationship between the countries, sometimes we may have to go lax on these things. But it should not be the case, because India should take a more strong attitude or stronger attitude towards their own people who transgress the rights of other countries. So that's the problem of India, and Sri Lanka cannot single-handedly or high-handedly take the law into their hands. And the other thing that is really worrying me is inter-country pollution. Now in 2019, I am also one of the people who are affected by that noxious gases that came, we believe, from India, affecting the coastal areas of Sri Lanka, including Colombo in the western coast. So that is against a transboundary issue where each country has to act in a responsible manner in keeping their environmental condition in a manner not contributing to the negative impacts in another country. Now when it comes to a country like India, they have to be very careful, because the rivers that flow through India sometimes come from other countries. So if those countries in the upstream areas of these major rivers are not concerned about the environmental conservation in those areas, they will be bearing the brunt of these issues. Then another issue that we had been seeing is the plastics that float from other countries, especially from the Indian coastline to Sri Lanka. So inter-country cooperation is needed in more than one aspect, and each country has a duty and obligations as members of the world community to maintain their environment and keep their pollution level and other things in check and balance, so not to adversely affect the interests or the communities of other countries. So it's a two-way obligation and a multi-party obligation also in certain instances. So we are close to India, so what is happening in India may affect us adversely. But when it comes to issues like climate change, all developed countries have to bear responsibility for the calamities that happen to us. We are not a responsible party for climate change, but we are victims of climate change caused by the emissions by other countries. So as I see it, it's a global issue, and every country should know that as good members of the world community, they had to take a stand, and if not, the whole world is going to suffer. They are also going to suffer, we are also going to suffer, and we never know where this whole thing will end up.
Thank you. Mr. Dabri, very quickly your thoughts as well.
Yeah, actually I also should add certain things to the comments made by Dr. Gunawardana. I was at the Mana coast during the last December, visiting to inspect some environmental issues, and I witnessed large number of Indian plastics with the Indian made in India and with the Indian languages used in India were full of, actually our coast was full of Indian plastics. So the environment has to be treated as in the global perspective, and the whole world should be treated as one ecosystem. We cannot separate the one country's environmental issues with the other country, as very correctly pointed out by Dr. Gunawardana. The fumes or gases emanated from India sometimes may cause respiratory diseases in the countries like Sri Lanka. So therefore the global perspective, or this the global ecosystem concept should be developed and actually furthered by each and every country. And I also like to emphasize the meaning of development. The dictionary meaning of development, it says development is a process that creates growth, progress, positive change, or the addition of physical, economic, environmental, social and demographic components. Therefore, in the development, the positive change of environmental component is also an integral part. Therefore, we cannot separate economic development from the environmental development.
So you're saying, in other words, what you're trying to say is construction should happen without destruction. Right, Mr. Tabare?
Environmental development means that the quality of air, the water and the plant coverage will increase. So it's a positive, should be a positive thing, not a detrimental thing.
No, our environmental, the developmental model or development thinking has to be changed. So if we think only the construction of buildings and obtaining money and growing maize or removing forest cover and growing maize or any other economic crop is development, that's wrong, because the development has not only taken place in the economic era or economic arena, the environmental science also has developed.
Right.
And the environmental laws also has developed. We have to take all this development into consideration, because
Doctor, just give me a second, Mr. David, if you don't mind, please. I just want to quickly move to Dr. Pereira, because we are running out of time and we are trying to finish the show in a few minutes from now. Very quickly, Dr. Pereira, you have championed the cause of garbage in Sri Lanka for the garbage, the queen, and you've championed this cause for a very long period of time in the country. The question is, we are a country, when we had our own garbage issues, we brought in container loads of toxic garbage to Sri Lanka, and thanks to a court order, all this garbage returned to where it came from or originated from. But
not all.
Not all.
Not all. Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
At least some of it was because of thanks to a court order. So the court system in Sri Lanka proves a point that they are very serious about the environment in the country. But do you think, I'm posing the same question that I posed to Dr. Saiwani before, do you think the government is serious about environmental protection? Because the president over and over again has said or reiterated his stand about protecting the environment, and you saw the Minister of Environment himself saying how important it is to conserve the environment and how serious they are about it. Do you have the feeling that the government is serious about
Well, I think this government is very desperate. At the moment, the reason being, we have a huge debt to pay back. And I think they are trying to manage this in different ways. And I think what is happening right now is they are willing to sell anything and everything in order to pay back the debt. But what they don't realize is why the people have voted for them was that they would be able to develop this country in such a manner so that we will be able to pay back the debt. It's not like a beggar going round and selling his house, his car and all those things and then eventually paying back the debt. That's not the way we should do it. So basically what is happening with the government right now is they are desperate to find money, and they are listening to anyone and everyone who wants to buy any resource in order to so they are willing to sell it. So what basically should happen really is, I firmly believe the government, if they want to move forwards in this manner, if they want to make a positive change, they need to get others on board. They can't run it on their own. They have failed, and so they need to get the others on board, get every person for assistance, develop a system whereby you can actually develop the economy while you also protect the environment, and make sure that you do the development in such a manner that it really is an economic development.
Thank you very much, the two ladies.
But don't
and the
touch
two
the
gentlemen.
Sinharaja forest, please.
For your thoughts in the first and second round. We're going for a short commercial break. When we come back, it's the final round where each speaker would get 3 minutes of free airtime to discuss about how they think the country should move forward as far as conserving the environment is concerned. All this and more after short commercial breaks. Stay connected, stay with Face the Nation. We will be right back. Welcome back. This is Face the Nation, the final round. We start off for the final round with Dr. Sinharaja, Director, Environmental Foundation Limited, to speak about her thoughts on the importance of conserving the environment. Your time starts now.
Thank you. I think I would like to use my 3 minutes to bring in few concepts. So we have to remember that every politician is keen to make sure that the basic needs, rather I would call the survival needs of the people that voted for them are met, are satisfied. And that is a noble thought, there is no doubt about it. But what is really important in Sri Lanka is to look at, in order to do that, the type of models, the development models that we want to take in. Because I don't think with the amount of rich biodiversity, the diversity of the ecosystems that are in this country, we really need to go for the typical models that we always see elsewhere. Now, in all throughout the day, we've been talking about Sinharaja itself. Let me quote something with Sinharaja itself. Now, do you know one particular plant, Gyronops valla, which we call as Valdapatti in Sri Lanka, in Sinhala, that plant itself, at the moment in the global black market, the extract from this particular plant, just 2 grams, is marketed at around $3,000 or over $3,000, just 2 grams. What we really need to look at in this country in terms of development is to grab that kind of opportunities. The audience, the speakers here were talking about our commitment to international conventions. We are signatory to conventions like CITES that control trade. But we have not looked into how we can use that kind of opportunities and also to bring in economic models that will have a very little impact on the environment. I would say the scale of the destruction can be minimized if we can look into novel economic models that would heavily rely on the natural resources and the importance of them, because we had always been very ignorant about it. The other point that I always want to make is the need of engagement and also the need to take precautionary approach, because the need of engagement should be at all levels, and without that engagement we wouldn't be able to take decisions. So not just the general public but also the politicians but also the officials need to engage at all levels so that we would be able to look at what is environmentally correct, socially correct but also economically correct, so that you would be able to take the right path. But I should also emphasize the need for precautionary approach. For a long time, development and conservation had been going in 2 different paths but not together. We need to get together and apply precautionary approach. That's my message.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Sinharaja, Director, Environmental Foundation Limited. We now move our attention to Attorney at Law Ravindranath Dabari, Chairman of the Center for Environmental Justice.
Thank you. I think when we discuss about the environmental protection, first of all, we should explore why our indigenous people or great grandfathers of ours worship the trees and the environment. There is a reason for that. Our communities and the modern people should explore and investigate why this was done. In exploring the reasons, we find each and every person has 2 wombs which supply their requirements. First 9 months of our life we spend in our mother's womb, and when we are spent in our mother's womb, the mother provides us with all our requirements, water, food and all requirements is provided by our mother. And For that we worship our mother till they die, even after they are dead. But after that 9 months, we start living in this world, and our second womb is the environment. After the mother's womb, all the requirements are provided to us by this environment. Even the water, food and all requirements are provided by this environment. That is why we should respect and we should worship our environment. Even during our childhood, what our parents do is they are just only instruments. They take certain things from the environment and feed us. But although we keep on worshipping our parents, we do not worship the environment. I think that culture has to be again reintroduced to the society, that the losing of the respect for the environment causes or leads to all these environmental destruction. And the development models selected by the rulers has to be not the development models that are imported from other countries. They have to prepare and modify and develop a development model which is suitable to this country.
Thank you very much, Attorney at Law Ravindranath Dabari, Chairman of the Center for Environmental Justice. We now move our attention to Dr. Ajanta Pereira, Environmental Scientist.
Yeah, a very interesting statement was made by Mr. Mahinda Amaravira with regard to the environmental issues. He said a CID investigation needs to be done in order to find out about the illegal cutting of the forest. Now, he as the Minister for Environment should be looking for the EIAs. Where are the missing EIAs? Because so many projects have been done so far, and every project should have an EIA report, because that's the law. But we have not seen a single EIA report, because without that EIA report you cannot develop. So most of the development that has happened so far have been illegal development, because there is no EIA. And the other thing is, he has also mentioned, and I think it was Mr. Charita Herath who has mentioned, that he wants to amend the National Environmental Act. And I hope within the National Environmental Act that he will not scrap the EIA, because the EIA makes sure that development can take place while protecting the environment. Then there is the Right to Information Act. And every person in this country can ask any question about anything that is happening in the country because of the Right to Information Act. So the young people who were arguing, the young people who were questioning, they have a right to know, and that is given by the Right to Information Act. Now, yesterday or today, the President was talking about the Surakimu Ganga, and he said how important for the government is to protect the rivers. But when I look at the budgetary allocation for Surakimu Ganga, it's only 200 million rupees. Now, how can you do with 200 million rupees a Surakimu Ganga project? And we should know that the water is so important for the people. But no mention was said about the rainwater harvesting. We are a country which receives a lot of rain, and we need to harvest the rainwater, and that should become a regulation for every household to carry out rainwater harvesting. Then today again the President said something about developing environment. No one has the right to develop the environment. Environmental resources are there for the sake of the people today and for the next generation. So the air we breathe, the water we drink, and the soil belongs to the next generations. Nobody has a right to change it. And the last one is, no one should even dream about building reservoirs in Sinharaja forest. Sinharaja forest is our heritage, and we should not touch it, because the moment you do development within it, the development will continue to happen and will have a ripple effect. And therefore, the very best thing that anyone can do is to protect Sinharaja and do not touch it doesn't
Thank you very
belong to
much.
us, to our children.
We now move our attention to Attorney at Law Jagat Gunawardena, environmental lawyer.
Thank you. We all have a duty and obligation to protect the environment, as I said earlier, and it has a twofold responsibility on every citizen. One is the duty and the other is a responsibility. So we should take both these considerations quite seriously, and if the wider segment of the society comes forward to assert their rights, we may not have such a hard time in trying to protect the environment. I am happy that the younger generation is showing, at least a certain amount of people in the younger generation are showing a keenness in trying to ensure that their future is secure. But we as the senior generation, although we are now not in their age group, we also have a duty and obligation towards the younger generation and the yet unborn generations not to leave this place in a worse condition than what we inherited as youngsters and young adults. So it's a twofold obligation on the society. The younger generation has a duty and obligations to ensure that they get a good environment, and we have a duty and obligation to ensure that the younger generation does not inherit a environment that is far inferior and far deteriorated than what we inherited. Coming to the issue, we have a duty and obligation and a commitment. We should have a commitment to educate the public on the environment in a deeper basis. That's something that I have always found, that the public is less environmentally literate. So we have to increase the environment literacy of the country, and also we have to enhance the bioempathetic nature in the society. That's the word I want to use. Empathy with all living entities, bioempathy, a concept that has been there ingrained in our society, but sadly losing sight in the modern day. So we have to bring these concepts back in a more scientific and logical manner than we experienced and practiced it in a more intuitive manner in the lost eras, but we have to now bring it in a more scientific, more holistic manner, and we have to exercise our rights in a more assertive manner. I wish and hope that at least a certain segment of the society would come forward to avert the crisis that is awaiting to happen in the foreseeable future if we do not act fast and act quickly and act in a prudent manner. That's the message that I want to impart.
Thank you very much, Attorney at Law Jagat Gunawardena, environmental lawyer, for joining us this evening. Dr. Sevwan Jayakudi, Director, Environmental Foundation Limited. Dr. Ajanta Pereira, environmental scientist, as well as Attorney at Law Ravindranath Dabre, Chairman, Center for Environmental Justice. Thank you very much, Sonali, Attorney at Law, Nadeem, as well as Chaturanga, for joining us this evening on the show. Deforesting environments like the Sinharaja Forest Reserve, where ecosystems have thrived for centuries, is uncalled for. Destroying these natural treasures in the name of development is simply ecocide, and the price will be paid by our children and their children after them. I leave you tonight with a quote, as I always do. What's the use of a fine house if you haven't got a tolerable planet to put it on? Take care and good night.